Welcome back, everyone. Today on the podcast, we are joined with Timothy Morales. He is British American and has an incredible story to tell. He survived 8 months under occupation by the Russians in the city of Kherson. He's out with a new book, Walking Past Tombstones. He's joining us today to share his story. Timothy, thank you for joining the channel. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing a lot better. Right now I'm on a 10-day R&R in England, meeting my family, and I will be returning to Ukraine on Tuesday. But I also want to start out, first of all, by saying a big thank you to you and to the other, like Denis Davidov, the Russian dude, and a whole list of other people. I watch you guys every single day, and I just want to let you know that the information that I got from your videos, collective videos, was one of the main things that kept me sane. Just having the knowledge of things coming through. So I want to start out by saying a big thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that. That's incredible to hear for me that you were watching my YouTube channel in the city of Kherson while under occupation from the Russians.
Until they turned the electricity out, but yeah.
So for my audience, there was a New York Times article that was pretty well publicized back in November when you first got out of the city.
Yes.
But let's go ahead and start in the beginning. When did you move to Ukraine, and how long did you live there, and maybe share why did you move there?
Okay, I was a university professor at a small Midwestern in America university, English professor, and we had a summer where we were paid money to go teach somewhere else. All of the big names were off the list. We couldn't go to come to England. We couldn't go to France or Italy. We had to choose somewhere that was sort of off the beaten path. And growing up in England, as I did, my father was in the military and spent a lot of time worrying about the Soviet Union, worrying about the threat of the Soviet Union. And after the Soviet Union fell apart, it was just something that was a draw. I wanted to go to Russia originally, but the visa situation was too complicated. And I was told by one of my former professors, go to Odessa, Ukraine. It's the capital of humor. It's a great place. So I went to Odessa and fell in love with the place. Went back to America, taught for a couple of more years, and then decided I need to change my life up. So I moved to Ukraine, and yes, changed my life up.
I heard you mention in a different interview that you thought, after going back to the United States, that life in America was just too boring, that you found the excitement of Eastern Europe more appealing.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that's just one of the things. I understand when I had my job at a university, I was tenure track. My whole life was planned out. I will retire at this age and I will teach classes and get my retirement money, and everything was planned out. Wanted something a little bit more exciting, and ended up getting that in spades.
So what year did you first go to Odessa?
Okay, my first actual trip was 1999. I moved to Ukraine.
99.
Yeah, I moved to Ukraine in the early 2000s.
So when did you start living in the city of Kherson?
Okay, when I moved to Ukraine, I moved to Kherson. I'd met a lot of people when I was teaching in Odessa, and they were students, faculty who hailed from Kherson. So I was taken on trips, shashlik cookouts, all of the incredible Ukrainian hospitality, and sort of ended up liking Kherson at that time. So when I ended up moving back, I moved back there. Yeah.
So now let's go back in time to February or January of last year.
Mm-hmm.
All this talk, President Biden said, we have the intelligence, Putin's actually going to do it this time. Did you believe these reports that Russia would ever launch a full-scale invasion?
Yeah, I had absolutely no doubt in my mind that they would not. And the people that I was reading, the people that I was following in the news, were saying that Putin had like an incredibly incapable army, number-wise, resource-wise, to invade Ukraine. The Americans were saying, yes, they're going to invade. And sometimes I think, given recent history and whatnot, uh, the American government tends to overreact on the err on the side of caution, if you would. And so I thought that's what they were doing. And I was listening to and looking at what sort of soldiers and military equipment they had amassed on the borders, and it absolutely wasn't enough. Any military strategist would tell you it wasn't enough, and time has showed us that it wasn't enough. So I didn't think it was going to happen. I definitely would have left if I thought it was going to happen, even if I thought a little bit that it was going to happen.
Did you get any kind of notifications or communication from the UK or US governments advising you to get out of the area?
Yeah, we email. The embassy sends out email alerts, but okay, they still have a 20-year-old summerly email alert telling you not to swim in the Black Sea near Odessa. Okay, now it's appropriate, but yeah, this was from about 20 years ago when there was a lot of pollution there. So you take those things sometimes with a pinch of salt. So
Yeah, sometimes there's just too many, and then you
yeah.
don't believe it's really going to
Yeah,
happen.
yeah, that was one I agree I should have listened to, but I didn't.
So now let's go to the day of the invasion. Can you speak to how you found out it was happening and what was happening those first couple days for you?
Okay, my birthday's several days before. It was on the 21st of February, so I'd gone and taken my daughter out to eat, and we went to a cafe afterwards for cake and coffee. Dropped her off, and there was not even really a sense of pending doom. You have to understand, for most Ukrainians, for 9 years, 8.5 years, we've had this. The Russians are going to attack at any given moment, so we really probably don't pay as much attention to it as maybe foreigners might. So it's just a normal week leading up to it. And then on the 24th, 5:30 in the morning, I got a phone call from my ex-wife. She said, pick up the. Oh, actually, I got a message. She said, pick up the bleeping phone. And I was like, okay, here we go. Maybe my daughter's sick. Typical things that happen at that time of year. Finally got back to her, and that's when she told me the Russians had invaded. And yeah, I was shocked. I was very, very shocked by that.
So did you try and get out of the city?
Yes, I have a car, and but the car had about half a tank of petrol, half a tank of gas in it. So the first order of business was to fill the car up, because that even early in the morning, everywhere was starting to be just inundated with people at the bread shops, at the cigarette kiosks, at the petrol stations, at the grocery stores, the ATM machines. People were just starting to get crazy. So we had to get petrol because we knew half a tank's not going to get us very far. Very, very, very big lines at the petrol station. Anyway, finally, through people we knew, we got the car filled up. We had a special way of getting into the cutting in front of the line. It's a typical way things happen over here. And so filled the car up, went back, picked up my daughter, went to this village called Zelenovka. And Zelenovka's very, very close to the Berislav Chaussee. And the Berislav Chaussee is the road that connects the Antonovsky Bridge to Nikolaev. That's the main road. So we went there to pick up a cousin's wife and a daughter to try and help get them out. And while we were there, while people were packing and putting things into the car, we saw a tank battle happened on the Berislav Chaussee, probably about 300, 400 meters from where we were standing. When we got there was Ukrainian tanks and military vehicles sort of standing still. They moved across our view, out of view, and then probably about 10 minutes later, they came back very, very quickly, went out of view that way, and then probably about 5 or 10 minutes after that, the Russians came. And they were doing this back and forth thing. We didn't stay to watch the whole show. We put everybody in the car, a couple of trips, got them back to the center of Kherson because we understood, yeah, that definitely wasn't a road that we could take, especially with kids in the car.
So you made the decision not to try and get to Mykolaiv. I'm assuming that's the direction you were heading.
Yeah. That was the direction. We ended up, like I said, if it were just adults, certainly if it had just been me, yeah, I would have done it. But my daughter was 10 at the time, sorry, 9 at the time, and the other little girl, her cousin, was 3. And you just don't take those kind of chances with kids. So.
But your family did eventually get out of the city.
Yes. My son was in Kiev, and I was lucky enough at university. I was lucky enough to get him out to Lviv on the second day of the invasion. I just told him, just drop everything, pack your bags, get on the train. He left before the crowd left, and he got to Lviv safely, and then probably at the end of March, the beginning of April, I gave my card to my ex-wife, and she, my daughter, and my ex-mother-in-law were able to leave through the western part and to go off to a different location.
So for people willing to pay money, the Russians were allowing some civilians out of the city?
I'd heard a lot about money exchanging hands. I don't know. From what I understood, my ex was able to get out without paying any money, and I know a couple of other people who have said they were able to get out without paying money. I've read so many more stories about people having to pay all kinds of money. So I just know the 2 people that I know who were able to leave did not pay any money. So they said it was harrowing, very, very harrowing.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
So the city of Kherson is the only regional capital that the Russians managed to take without destroying it.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, from your personal firsthand experience, did you know anyone that was happy to see the Russians taking the city? They viewed it as a positive development.
Well, as in any place, you sort of have circles of people who are similar to yourself. So everybody in my circle, absolutely not. Even people that I saw on the streets, almost all of them were entirely anti-occupation, very, very much pro-Ukrainian. But yeah, I saw some things like through my window. I saw a real estate agent who, because she has a personalized number plate, helping somebody with a Russian license plate with some documents. I saw something like that happen. Also, my flat, because I lived between 2 flats. I lived between my ex-wife's flat and my flat. My flat overlooked a big a private medical facility, and that place was inundated every single day with Russians, Chechens coming to use the hospital services. And I saw a lot of interaction between the people who worked at the hospital, obviously, and the Russian soldiers. So I saw in those sorts of things, but the general spirit was no, absolutely not. Very, very pro-Ukrainian, which is kind of strange because historically Kherson's been a Russian-speaking city. And I know language doesn't have to do with what kind of patriotism you have, but they had, like, for many years, they had like sort of 50-50 in terms of the electorate between the pro-Russian candidates and the pro-Western candidates. But Russia sort of put a stop to that.
So, can you explain your nationality background?
Okay, all right. It's very, very complicated. My mum's English. My dad's American. I was born in the Netherlands because my dad was in the American Air Force and was stationed at Soesterberg Air Force Base. And about 3 months after I was born, we moved to England, and I lived in England till I was 18, went to English school, and then after that, moved to America. So lots of different lots of different passports, nationalities, life experiences are all involved in that. So yes.
But with your background, you thought it was best to remain hidden from the Russians.
Well, yeah, and also too because my dad was Hispanic. Morales is my last name. Obviously, I don't look like somebody who is very Slavic. So yeah, and also I'm sort of big guy. Okay, not super big, but like 6 foot tall. And towards the end of occupation, it was mostly old people, like walking around. So I sort of, as the expression goes, stuck out like a sore thumb. So I had to come up with a lot of different ways to be as inconspicuous as possible in my trips between flats. Yeah. So yeah.
So you decided for the 8 months you were under occupation to remain hidden. How did you accomplish this?
Okay, for the first couple of months, I did not leave the courtyard of my ex-wife's house. And the only reason that I did venture out was because the internet was cut off to my ex-wife's house. So I made a couple of short trips to this shop where I could hang around the corner, quickly download news updates and whatnot, and send off some messages and then run back to the courtyard without going through any major roads or whatnot. And finally, it was just like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I've got to go back to my flat where the internet was still working. So I would travel. I've lived in Kherson for 15, 16 years, many years, and I've always lived in the center, so I know the back streets probably better than most Kherson residents do. So I had basically 3, because as I told you earlier, the medical center that was directly in front of my flat building was always crawling with Russians. So I had like 3 different routes that I would take that depended on the situation. So yeah. So doing that, not having my lights on at nighttime, looking at my phone or my computer, when behind a wall in my flat, I had a television wall, and I was very, very close to that, so none of the light would bleed out. Leaving my flat was always checking the front, going out into the stairwell, checking the back, and doing this 2 or 3 times. Then finally said, okay, let's go, and leaving. So yeah, I just tried my hardest not to draw attention to myself.
So how was the internet under occupation? Were you concerned that the Russians were monitoring people, or
Okay,
perhaps
I got it.
restricting it somehow?
Okay, there was a lot of restrictions, but the VPN, I got a VPN, and it allowed me to pretend I was in Germany, I think it was, so I was able to access everything. But they were being very, very restrictive on that. They cut off some of the internet. I had internet at my flat for a while, then it cut out, and then I had to get Russian SIM card and pay for 50 gigabytes of data. So yeah, it was always a challenge. There was even a period of about a week and a half where I had my computer on the window ledge at my ex-wife's house because somebody somewhere had a faint sliver of internet connection that I was able to log on to. So it was a challenge always.
What did you do when you didn't have internet?
I found from the naughty days. Okay, I use Netflix now, but when I first moved to Ukraine, um they weren't really ashamed of downloading pirated movies and whatnot. And I'd found in an old box somewhere a hard drive with a bunch of films on it. So there was that. That was plugging in, watching films from 15 years ago or whatever. That was it. Yeah, yeah.
Were you having to watch certain movies more than once to pass the time?
Apparently, I was quite a prolific pirate. It was a terabyte and it was full. So yeah, I didn't get to the point. I think maybe if the occupation had lasted for a couple of more months, I would have had to start making round two with some of the films. So yeah.
So, how were you able to purchase food and other basic necessities to survive?
Okay. I had, like I said, I stayed at my ex-wife's house when she and her mom and my daughter were evacuated, but they still had family members who lived there, and so they most of the family members were family members who worked on the market, so they were able to bring home food. So really, okay, the food wasn't as diverse. I'm not complaining about it, but it wasn't like super diverse, but there was never a moment where there was no food. So, so yeah. So they did that, and then when I eventually left and moved back into my flat, there was a street where they had a sort of a market where people were selling things out of the boots or the trunks of their cars. So I would go there. I ended up later on going into this Euro store once I felt not afraid to go in there. So yeah, like I said, there was never a point where I was like, what am I going to eat? There was plenty of times where it's like, oh my gosh, I got to eat pot noodles or instant ramen noodles. Again, those kind of complaints. But there was never a point where I was like food insecure. So yeah.
So, you were eating a lot of cup ramen noodles.
Yeah, that was probably about 30% of my that was about 30% of my diet. It was interesting the other day. I was before I came to on holiday here. I was in the store and I was like, I need just eat something quick and I don't want to do any dirty dishes. And I grabbed a pot of ramen noodle and I was like, yeah, no. I put it down and got something else. So it's going to be a long time before I can do one of those again.
Yeah, I imagine. So, let me ask about currency. Did you ever, what currency were you using when you were making all these purchases?
Okay, so like basically from the early days, the ATMs pretty much stopped working. They apparently you could get like 1,000 hryvnia out of an ATM if you waited in line for 4 hours with the crowds of people. So, but essentially after like a couple of weeks or whatever, the banks stopped working. The Russians ripped out the card readers in stores. So there was no way because they wanted to Russify the economy. They wanted to introduce the ruble. But I will say that, okay, I wasn't doing a lot of shopping there, but in all my time, I still have never seen a Russian ruble. So yeah, not once. Everybody had prices, and a little bit later on, prices in hryvnia. A little bit later on, they would also include prices in rubles because they were forced to. But nobody I know used rubles. I asked some of the females who were in the house, who were looking after me, who worked on the market. They said, yeah, mostly it's Russian soldiers buying stuff in rubles. And then the women would run as soon as they could to the money changers and change it back into hryvnia. Nobody wanted a ruble. Uh, there was the rumor going around that all the Russian rubles were counterfeit and fake. So I'm not sure if that was a Ukrainian psyops, but whatever. For one reason or another, there was nobody I knew or ever saw or heard about ever used ruble, accept it as payment from a soldier on the market, and then immediately exchange it. So,
And you also said that people would have and use US dollars.
okay, everybody in Ukraine, okay, that's totalizing. Almost everybody in Ukraine has their excess money stored in dollars. Maybe a few in euros or whatever, but it's pretty much dollars. So because of all the bank collapses, and nothing to do with the Russians here, but just the history of bank collapses in Ukraine, most people don't trust the hryvnia, the wild devaluation. When I first came to Ukraine, it was four hryvnia and 20 kopecks was $1. It's coming down a bit, but at the worst, recently it was about 41 hryvnia for $1. So it's fluctuated crazily throughout all of the time. So usually people are in the habit of, if they have anything left over, they go ahead, exchange it for dollars, and they keep it under their mattress or whatever.
So you were able to survive for 8 months without going to a bank to withdraw money.
Okay, well, I guess I'm a little bit Ukrainian. I had my stash under the mattress also, so I just used that, and I was able to, because I was still teaching. I teach English while the internet was still working. I would teach, not for business purposes because I couldn't even touch the money, but just for my sanity, to be, keeping a sense of normalcy. So yeah, so I couldn't touch any of that money. There's no way I could get to it. So yeah, I had like I said, my Ukrainian stash of money that I would send with Vera to the market, so the money changers could change it into hryvnia for me.
So you continued working even though you couldn't have any way of accepting payment. But did your students know where you were and what conditions you were under?
My students. Some of my students I've known for like 8 years. It's so I have an English school, and I have other teachers, and they teach students in a more traditional sense. My students are they're just very, very long term. For some reason, they like having lessons with me. So the ones that I know, that I have known for a long time, yeah, they knew where I was. They knew what I was, doing. But that was pretty much it. I did not let anybody else know. I had some old girlfriend write to me from America and was like, are you in Ukraine?" And I was like, "No, I'm in London." So I sort of didn't want whatever, loose lips sink ships. But the students knew where I was, because I have known these people for a long, long time.
Wow. So under occupation in the city of Kherson, how much did average people understand or know what was going on with the wider war?
Yeah, that was okay. They have an expression in Russian, "sarafan radio," which is Russian version of word of mouth, and you know how that goes. So there was a lot of misinformation. I would try to have, well, my Russian's not that great, but I would try to have conversations with the people were living in the same flat as I, and they were coming up with like very sort of big, extravagant stories about what was happening, and I would say, no, 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 this is what's happening. This is what I've read from here. This is what I've seen on videos, and I just got to the point where it's like there's no point trying to understand, or trying to come to sort of an agreement on what's going on with people. It's just a little bit unreliable, let's say, like that. Pro-Ukrainian, but big dramatic, very, very big sort of dramatic scenarios were created in people's heads. So yeah.
So after the Ukrainian Kharkiv counteroffensive in September, the war shifted its focus more to the city of Kherson.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your reaction, or what was your experience with all of those HIMARS strikes both on the city, but especially on that bridge, the Antonovsky Bridge. They kept trying to bring it down, and that was one tough bridge. But what was your impression of all those HIMARS strikes?
Well, we had heard, I mean, okay, before the Antonovsky Bridge, there was Chernobyevka Airport that was struck, who knows, 40, 50 times, whatever the number actually is, but it was a lot. And I would read about these. We would all know about these happenings. But from the center of Kherson and whatever they were using to attack Chernobyevka Airport, you really couldn't hear or see very much. Maybe a little hazy plume of smoke in the distance, and maybe some little light thudding sound. So, but we were happy about that. But the first time the HIMARS struck, that was about 7 kilometers away. The Antonovsky Bridge is about 7 kilometers, or was about 7 kilometers away from where I was staying, and that was pretty loud. That was quite loud, and at first everybody was like, "What?" And then when we understood what it was, the shock wore off, and we ended up loving to hear the sound. There was nothing better than hearing the sound of 6 explosions happening, and the closer they were to us, the better. So we ended up loving that. But yeah, that first one, the first time they struck the Antonovsky Bridge, it was a little bit unnerving because we didn't know what it was. We hadn't heard anything like that up until that point.
And you had complete faith in the accuracy of this weapon system?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'd seen again. I'd seen the videos of them, and I trusted them, and they seemed very, 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 very precise. But it really wasn't until after liberation. I was with the Reuters news crew, and then we did a HIMARS tour of Kherson, of downtown Kherson, and it was just incredible. Every thing that was hit was just perfectly hit, and there was some collateral damage, I guess, like broken windows or whatever around. But structural damage was just, I knew the hotel where that was owned by Saldo, where the Russians were using as a headquarters, and it's sandwiched in between, in the whole part of town, between lots of other buildings. It was hit. Nothing else was hit. The upstairs room on the appeals court, where Stromosov was having a meeting, or was meant to be having a meeting, it was struck, and the pathway in front of the appeals court was still walkable. It was none of the cobblestones had been moved, and it was like this, one place after another. So yeah, I had faith, but then to go around and see it, even though I had faith in it, was still just incredibly amazing about how accurate they were.
So you actually didn't remain successfully hidden for 8 months. You had a close encounter with an FSB officer. Can you walk us through what happened with that incident?
Okay, well, this ties in because about a week previously, there was a college a little bit further up the street from my ex-wife's house that had been hit by HIMARS. They were using it as a dormitory for Russian soldiers or whatever, and it had been hit. And about a week later, there were some guys. I finished teaching. I'd gone outside for a little bit, and there was a couple of guys just in sort of workman's clothes pointing, and they were pointing at one part of the building where the windows had been blown out from the HIMARS strike. They started talking to me in Russian, and I don't like talking to strangers, especially in those kind of situations. So I said, I don't know, in Russian, obviously, and went back in the house. Went and taught a couple of more classes, came back out for fresh air, and where the gate was, because somebody had closed the gate after they'd left, there was like 10 FSB soldiers with their guns out shouting at me to stop. So never one for recognizing other people's authority, I ran in, shut the front door, knocked on the downstairs neighbor's door. She was the only other lady in the whole porch besides me who was still there. Uh, Shouted out that the Russians are here. She said, go upstairs, lock your door. So I went upstairs, I locked my door. And doors in Ukraine are very, very protective. There's usually 3 or 4 sets of deadbolts. It's more like having an apartment in New York, like having an apartment in New York City, where there's a bunch of different deadbolts and locks and keys and whatnot. So I went in and I did all of that. The front door's made of metal. It has spikes into the wall, so the hinges can't be cut off. This is very, very typical, at least in Kherson. So I locked the door and was like, okay, what am I going to do here? So the first thing I did was hid everything that needed to be hidden, passports, money. For some reason, I had my phone that day, but anyway, I turned it off. My computer was on the window ledge. I was teaching on the window ledge that day. I called somebody. I told them the Russians are here. One of my contacts in Odessa. Shut my computer, hid that, just hid everything, and looked out the window on the other side of the house, and there was a big sort of military vehicle there, and one of the soldiers was getting out with a massive crowbar, and it's like, okay, here we go. Banging on the downstairs door, the entryway to the courtyard, didn't do anything to that. Then there was banging on downstairs doors, and I guess the downstairs lady started talking to them. And then probably a good 15 minutes later, there was banging on my door, and I heard the downstairs neighbor say, Tim, open the door, it's going to be okay. And at that point, it was just kind of, okay, what am I going to do? There's nothing else to do. I'm tired of this, so I just opened the door. And 10, 11 FSB guys with machine guns came charging into the house. So yeah.
So how did you avoid being taken away?
Okay. Okay, the first thing is lifelong training, or not lifelong, but living in Ukraine, yeah, you understand that, and then there are elements of Ukraine that are very similar to elements of Russia. I mean, there are. I mean, I know patriots will say with different people and whatnot, but at least in the government. So I've had years of dealing with policemen trying to stop and get money off you while you're driving driving your car, and this happens all the time. So I've sort of developed sort of a thick skin. So I wasn't afraid. So that was not because I'm brave, but just it was like I'm used to this. So they started talking to me in Russian. I understood probably maybe about 80% of what they said, but I pretended I understood nothing. I don't speak Russian. And they finally scrounged up somebody who spoke a little bit of English and started asking me questions. They asked me where my passport was. I said, somebody stole my car with all my documents in it, which they didn't really follow through on that, which to me indicates that they were knowledgeable the cars were being stolen left, right, and center by the Russians. So yeah, everything was in there. Where are you from? I told them I was Irish. I quickly went through and figured out the least offensive native English-speaking country I could come up with. So I told them that I was from Ireland. What do you do? I'm a professor. I teach English. Where's your phone? It was in the car. No, we saw you with the phone. It's like, come on. There's no phone service here anymore. There's no internet service. Why would I be on a phone? And yeah, they believe that. Well, it was true, but they believed that. And they just started just trying to get stuff out of me. They saw it wasn't going very well. And then they started to toss the house looking for things. And they stayed there probably for maybe about 2 hours. There was this one sort of the shortest one was I guess, in charge, and he was there with his mask on, and I had a mask on, but he was there shouting in Russian, and I've perfected the not even reacting, even if though I kind of understood what he was saying, and that was it. It was they went through, they tossed some stuff, they didn't find any of my computer, my phone, money. Obviously, they didn't find my passport, and I guess they just got bored and left. So, and in the meantime, don't get me wrong, the old lady from downstairs, because Ukrainian and Russian grandmas are the most feared people in the world, she was shouting at them. She was shouting, "Why are you doing this? He's a professor. He's not done anything wrong. You know, why are you acting like this?" Just shouting, non-stop shouting. So I credit her with a big part of me not being shot or taken away. So yeah, but it was just very, very typical, just laziness on their part. They should have taken me away. They didn't.
I'm very thankful for that. But
Yeah.
after that encounter, you decided it was no longer safe to be at this location.
Basically, when the Russian cars, because there was a couple of other I guess like plainclothes people's cars were in the front. Once they all left, probably about 5 minutes after that, I stuffed everything I could into my carry bag and headed back to my flat. Said goodbye to the flat I'd been living in for so long. I came back very, very early the next morning, and after about 30 minutes of walking around and making sure that nobody was hanging out or watching the flat, I took some more stuff, and then I left, and I never went back to that flat until after liberation. So yeah.
I can't imagine. So you told me you were not impressed with the Russians that you encountered that day. But from the rest of your time under occupation, you mentioned there was a hospital across the street and you
Yeah.
would watch them. What was your opinion or your observations of Russian soldiers in the city?
Okay. All right. I did not see these people with my own eyes, but like in the first days, there were videos, and some videos were taken by people who were living in the block of the block of flats that where I was staying. They would come back with videos. I would see videos on the internet. Those soldiers who were guarding the center of Kherson looked to be normally equipped, normal size, sort of, if you want to say smart, at least well dressed, well equipped. I never saw that in all of my time looking out of my flat window. It was, like I said, about 2.5 months before I went back to my flat and saw this. But from then on, it was just basically okay. The British have a television show called Dad's Army, and it's about a group of old men who it's a comedy. Old men who were given the task of defending England during the Second World War. Very famous comedy that any English viewers you have will know. But it's that sort of that mismatch of people, different sizes, different shapes, different ages, and it sort of reminded me of that. They were not well equipped. They were not well dressed. They weren't like physically intimidating. It just looked like they'd gone to the bus station and grabbed whoever they could and gave them different looking uniforms and some old weapons and stuff. Very, very, very unprofessional, very unintimidating, I guess. Yeah, it was weird. It was very, very weird.
That might be one of the most offensive things you could say about the Russians is that weren't very intimidating.
Yeah. No, they absolutely won. It really was a joke looking out there. And I hear a lot of I see a lot of videos of like Ukrainians showing captured Russians, and I know they're always going to show the worst ones and how unprofessional they look and how but really, 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 from my limited observation of the private medical clinic, that's what the majority of the military is made up of. Mismatched uniforms, older people, not Yeah. So.
By October, could you feel the Russians' hold over the city starting to fade?
Yeah, okay. Probably about the middle of October is when because my flat not only overlooks the medical center, overlooks not the main street of Kherson, but one of the main streets is a street called Kulikar. And every evening after probably about 4 o'clock, the road would just be Russian military vehicles or cars with V or Z spray painted on them, back and forth, up and down the streets. And I saw like at the beginning of October, it seemed to be a little bit less. I wasn't sure about that, but by the middle of October, absolutely, the traffic had almost ceased. Not quite. There would be days where I was like, I haven't seen a Russian in 3 days, and then boom, one would show up and it'd be like, ah. But it got less and less and less until eventually we didn't see them anymore.
So, can you talk about the day you found out
Yeah.
the city had been liberated? What was your experience that day?
Well, it was we'd been without electricity for 10 days. They cut it off, and life was basically I had a lot more in storage, but at that flat at that time I had like 8 books. And the only thing to stop me going crazy, because there was no phone, there was no electricity, obviously no internet. It was November, so the evening started to get dark about 4:30, something like that. So just a very, very short period of time where it was light. In the evenings, I would sit in my bathroom with a candle and read my book. In the daytime, it was sitting on my window ledge, looking out the window. That was my television, I guess. And yeah, and I was sitting there and, hadn't seen Russians in a while. And then all of a sudden, this car drove down the street with two very, very small Ukrainian flags sort of fluttering on the side of the car. And I was like, okay, there's somebody who's brave. Um, and, went back to my staring. And then about 2, 3 minutes later, something like that, it seems like it, a pickup truck came down the street that was honking its horn loudly, had people in the back of the car waving the Ukrainian flag. So the first one is like, okay, just somebody being brave, and maybe they see a Russian, they pull the flags off. This one was like, yeah, there's no hiding that. And that sort of opened the floodgate. Then all of a sudden, all kinds of cars came down the street with big Ukrainian flags, people screaming, people hollering. So I put on my clothes and went out and walked a direction I hadn't walked in like 8.5 months, and went down to Plощad Svobodny, the central Freedom Square in Kherson, and there were thousands and thousands of people there, and probably maybe about 10 minutes after I got there, the first Ukrainian soldiers showed up. So. And yeah, it was very, very cool. Very, very cool.
So, how did you eventually get out of the city?
I had a friend who used to live in Kherson. He's French, and he's how many French people you have? Very typical French, very persistent, very pushy, whatever. And he was pushing on everywhere he could to try to help find somebody who could get me out. And he finally made a connection with a journalist, a British journalist actually, who works for France 24, who knew an ex-boyfriend who was like one of the bodyguards for the Reuters news crew. So he was like, okay, they're going to come, they're going to get you when you're liberated. Then everything went out. We no way to connect. But the second day, I was after liberation. I obviously went back to Freedom Square, hanging around, and I started talking to somebody, and this guy turns around and it's like, Tim, and I was like, and it was the bodyguard of Reuters, and So yeah, so I hooked up with them, and that was probably the best week I had because they weren't leaving until after the journalist had finished his story. But I was able to hang out, speak English, uh, go with them to different places, have communication, eating together. And these were the guys who took me out. They took me to Nikolaev, and then they had to go up to Kiev. And then from Nikolaev to Odessa, ABC News did an interview with me, and they drove me from Odessa, from Nikolaev to Odessa.
And since liberation in November, you've been choosing to live in Odessa.
Yeah, yeah. It's okay. So not out of the frying pan into the fire because it was a lot better in Odessa, but we had, as soon as I came to Odessa, then that's when the missile strikes were happening on the power grids. So there was like 2 or 3 months where there was no electricity. So it was doable. Maybe if I had not had the experience for 8.5 months in Kherson, I'd be like, what the hell is this? And I would have left. But it was like, okay, whatever. This is still better than what I had before. And then they repaired everything. And yeah, I mean, I really like living in Odessa now. Yeah, we have air raid sirens. One time I stood on my balcony at 3 o'clock in the morning, drinking a cup of tea, watching the missiles. I can see the Black Sea from a balcony, watching missiles getting intercepted coming into Odessa. Yeah, that's where I live now.
Have you ever thought about moving to the UK or the United States, just leaving Ukraine for good?
Okay, well, as it stands right now, my daughter's in part of Ukraine, say very safe part of Ukraine. My son's living in Odessa. So I'm okay for a holiday, but I'm not going anywhere unless my kids go. So that's,
That makes
and
sense.
yeah, so people are saying, "Oh, move, move here, move there," and it's like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So
Let me ask you about your book. What was your motivation for writing it, and can you explain the title of "Walking Past Tombstones"?
okay, all right. The title is, I told you that there was different ways between my two flats, and it was the sort of, I had the 3 DEFCON level. Like if it was no problem, there was just a couple of Russians at Tarot smoking cigarettes and had their back to the road, I would take one way to get back to the flat. If there was a bunch of them, I would take another slightly more inconspicuous way home. But if there was a bunch of them and they were looking and they were searching, I would end up walking through this old graveyard that was probably probably is one of the grimmest places on earth. It's a unkempt graveyard full of marble plaques to men with all their Soviet medals on their chests, overgrown, packs of dogs walking through it, just like the absolute antithesis of cemetery in in America, for example. So yeah, that was it. So that was when it was at its worst, I would walk past tombstones. So that's where the title comes from. And as far as writing the book, it's my sister. My sister was pushing me. You've got to write a book. You've got to write a book. And I was like, okay, yeah. I will do it. I will do it. And I ended up doing it, and I found what was the best part of writing the book was it was kind of like therapy for me. And what I've done with the book is everything in the book's true. There's a couple of name changes of people who needed to have their name changed, but everything is true. But it kind of goes behind the scenes because people want to see HIMARS strikes and troop counts and whatnot. There's plenty of resources for that. I mean, I do mention HIMARS strikes and being busted by the FSB and those sorts of things, but it's sort of weaving the story of the all true story of me living in Ukraine, looking at Ukraine both through the eyes, or at least Kherson, the eyes of a foreigner, who knows what it's like to live in Ukraine. So it gives all the details, and many of the things we talked about, okay, obviously in fuller detail, but it's like what it basically felt like for an American or British person to be stuck in this very strange but very endearing country under occupation during 8.5 months. So yeah.
We're filming this podcast on a Wednesday. It's going to go up this weekend, but because this is an event that just happened, can I get your thoughts and reaction to the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant?
Yeah, I was okay. I'm in England now for a few days. Meet my mum, my sisters. We were in a village, and now we're in London. And this morning we were traveling between the two places, so I haven't really seen a whole lot of news about it right now. But yeah, the British BBC and all basically the channels here are paying a lot of attention to it, and I still haven't decided in my mind. I know we talked about this earlier, but I still haven't decided in my mind whether the Russians did this intentionally or this was just another clown car accident from all of the mining they did, and it just went terribly wrong. Because, one of the things is, I think the Ukrainians are fighting so bravely, heroically, and very strategically. They're doing an awesome job. The West has got their act together and are supplying things. The strategies and the tactics, all of those things. But there's also always, and anybody who's lived in this part of the world knows that there's also just an enormous amount of bad luck that happens because of incompetence, because of whatnot. So I still haven't looked at it enough to decide whether the Russians said yeah and pushed the button and blew the bridge up, or somebody was smoking a cigarette and blew the bridge up. So I haven't done that, but obviously I 100% understand it was the Russians who did that. But the ecological damage is just beyond me, just beyond me. I mean, fortunately, Kherson, the city, is elevated, so the flooding, maybe some of the areas there may be a little bit of flooding, but for the most part, Kherson is not going to be affected by this. But on the other bank, where lots of people have dachas and whatnot, it's just devastated. But fortunately, most of that area is like dachas, summer cottages where people go. A long time, all of the kids who were living there were evacuated from there. That was a long time ago. So it could be worse. It's terrible, but it could be worse. And my thing is, if it turns out that the Russians did this on purpose, and I think this will be the narrative, whether it is what it is or whether it's just the narrative, I think this is going to be extra motivation here in the coming days or the coming weeks when the counteroffensive starts to get underway. Because, yeah, it's devastating. I saw, fortunately, very, very few, if any, people have died. But I saw a video of a woman who was the zookeeper screaming, crying as she understood that all of the animals in the zoo, save the ducks and some other birds, had drowned. Yeah, and it's just, I don't know, it's just one more nail in the coffin of the relationship between Ukrainians and Russians. They will never, ever, ever. I hear people saying, "Yo, maybe in a generation." No, I think this is it. I think this is the biggest blunder Putin could have ever made.
So let me get your thoughts. How does this war end?
Well, okay, maybe I'm showing my age and people don't play this game anymore. The game Kerplunk. Do you remember the game Kerplunk?
Is that where you pull out the straws and
Where you pull
marbles
out
fall through?
the red, yeah. So it has red and yellow straws, and marbles in the top, and you pull it out, and a marble will drop here or there. But one unlucky person pulls a straw, and all the marbles fall. And I really do think that's what's going to happen here with the rest of the war. Okay, when that straw's pulled out, I don't know. I'm not a military expert. I don't know what the Zelensky and Zaluzhny and everybody's planning on. But I do think that, and we saw this in Kiev, we saw this in the Kharkiv region, we saw this eventually in Kherson, where everything is going fine for the Russians until it isn't. And I think that's going to repeat itself here. So, I mean, obviously, I hope it's before I get back. But there will become a point where that last straw will be pulled and the marbles fall, and yeah, the Russians will be gone. Whether it's gone to Crimea border or whether it's gone, that will be a different question. So, yeah.
So you told me you've been watching my YouTube channel for a while.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
there anything you wanted to ask me or get my thoughts on?
Okay, well, okay, you're learning about me. I feel like I know you, but I do want to say, okay, I know everybody does their different things and whatnot, but I will say this, okay, and it's not just me being a sycophant because you've been kind enough to have me on your show. But the thing that I really, really like about your show is there's always an upbeat, positive sense towards everything. There was always a sense that, okay, if I felt down because I hadn't heard HIMARS for 2 weeks and there's a bunch of Russians, you know, having a picnic in front of my flat, I know that I could go to your channel, watch it, and you know, I would come away feeling very, very reassured and positive about things. So, like I said, that's me being honest. That's not me just saying it because I'm on your show today. So yeah, I think it's wonderful. I like that the way you look at it, where you're taking like different elements of interesting things and not just looking at it from a strategic point of view. Yeah, I've read your bio. You're ex-military, and yeah. So yeah, that's I know a lot about you because I watched you every day. So
I knew since day one that, you know, an invasion force of 200,000 versus a country of over 40 million actively resisting was never going to succeed.
yeah.
Russia's actually underperformed my expectations for them. I thought in the beginning, yeah, they might take the city of Kharkiv, they might take the city of Odessa, but they're still going to lose eventually. I thought there would be a longer drawn out conflict with an entrenched insurgency, um, but the Ukrainian military held. Like it held its structure, it held its ranks, and then it's just been growing in size and growing in strength and capability for the last year. So yeah, originally when I started posting those videos, those early days were bleak. You know,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
Severodonetsk and Lysychansk were under attack, and all these map updates about, yeah, the Russians had given up on the north, but they were focusing exclusively on the Donbass region. I tried to make the consistent argument that the tide was eventually going to turn and the Russians were going to become incapable of advancing.
Mhm.
And yeah, I was putting those feel good clips at the end just to once again give people hope
Yeah.
that it's going to take time. It's incredibly frustrating. I hate how slow it's going supplying these aid and weapons from the West. But, you know, the thing I like saying is that the Russian economy is only slightly larger than Spain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So try to imagine all of the world's largest economies, you know, the NATO alliance, going to war with Spain.
Yeah.
Yes, Russia has a huge stockpile of Soviet equipment, but when you just look at the economics, no, Russia cannot sustain this war multiple years.
Yeah.
We're at a year and a half, and I think the Russians are going to break this winter. Um, I think they blew the dam because they know they can't hold the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, the land bridge. They're going to fall back to Crimea and tell their people they're making a last stand there, but I still don't think they're going to be able to hold on to Crimea.
I hope not. I hope that and you know one of the things is, and this is okay. Now I only have Ukrainian students. Before the war, I had it was predominantly Ukrainian students. I had Russian students. I had Belarusian students, and they were all like not Putin fans because that was always my like. If you're a Putin fan, I'm not going to teach you. So you need to be honest about that. Now, but anyway, I still cut them loose after the invasion. But you know, conversations we had not within the context of this stage of the war, but every single one, not just the Ukrainians being we're brave. The Russians said the same thing. The Belarusians said the same thing. Belarusians absolutely useless at fighting, generally speaking. Not me saying this, me repeating the words of Belarusians and Russians. Russians not very good at fighting, and Ukrainians are the crazy warriors. And this is a common cultural perception, not the Ukrainians have about themselves, but that the Russians have about the Ukrainians, that the Belarusians have about the Ukrainians, and it's sort of panning out like that. It's you know it's. Uh, Ukraine, with their limited resources, okay, now it's not quite so limited, but with their limited resources, like you said, the Russians are underperforming what you thought. I thought the Ukrainians would do good. They're overperforming what I thought they would do. So,
So we've gone over an hour, Tim. I appreciate your time. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience?
well, I just you know, I just want to. I live in Ukraine. I support Ukraine. I don't want to have Ukraine or Russia fatigue in the West. This is something that's very, very important. You know, and if you know people would like to aid and assist in any way, there's not just military assistance. There's a whole swath of charities and NGOs that are working. I'm not going to give you names or whatever. You can find those easily. But you know, those kind of supports, believe me, those things make a big difference to people. I teach, volunteer teach journalists in Odessa to help them with their English so that they can spread the news better. So any little tiny bit would be great, but even at the minimal, just don't get bored with this, because this is a very significant conflict, not just for Ukraine, but for you know for the world, for the you know the post Cold War world. This is the a battle that is, or not even a battle, a war that is something that will have consequences, either positive if Ukraine wins or negative if Russia doesn't lose. Let's say it like that.
Very well said. Thank you so much for your time, Tim. Maybe in the future we can talk again.
Okay, man, Jake, thank you so much. When I used to watch you on the videos, I never thought I'd be in this situation doing this. So I really do appreciate you having me on, and keep up the good work.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.